I'm Scott Cullen from Solomon, and I welcome you to Webinar Wednesday. We've done this two other times. Last week was more oriented toward the theory behind depreciated cost. This time around, I want to get more into the nuts and bolts of how to actually use the calculators. So to start that, I just wanted to show you where to get any resources that you need. This is solomonappraisal.com. This is a separate website from where the calculators are. But solomonappraisal.com has these headings. You can get downloads right here. And this is a free trial version of Sidekick that will work until the end of this week. It'll work until the 18th. So if you want to give it a try, that's how you do it. If you want to buy Sidekick, we have a coupon called Be Safe, BESAFE, that will give you $50 off of the $100 price. So be safe if you decide to buy Sidekick, and I'll show you how to do that in later in the presentation. Here's the user manual for Sidekick. Okay. Here's some theory if you want to read about the USPAP foundation that we're based upon. Us needing, as appraisers, needing to be aware of, understand, and correctly employ recognized methods. And then here's the recognized methods. See right here, cost-related adjustments, cost to cure, and depreciated costs. So that's kind of where we hang our hat if we're asked, what are you using to support your adjustments? We'll just say depreciated cost. Don't say Solomon. Solomon is a brand name, really. This is all good old-fashioned basic appraisal theory that has kind of laid dormant for quite a while, but I think it makes a lot of sense to be using it in today's day and age when we've got to have some arithmetic, show the calculations, most importantly, show the logic, our thought process behind it. Here's how to watch training videos. So this is the introduction. I want to refer to this line right here. These 6 lines are actual regression results that you get when you plot total cost of GLA versus the quantity of GLA, okay? So there is regression behind all of these tools. Here's the Q4. This is from 2015, so the data is a little bit old. Right now, this number would say Y equals 90 plus $44,000. So any Q4 house, the way that you would get the total cost is you would start with this $44,000 base cost, I guess you'd say, or startup cost. And then every square foot you added to that house would cost $90. So that's the basis for our adjustment. When the house grows by a foot, there's a $90 increase in the total cost. So that's a key concept. Here's the Q6, it's 55. Again, these are a couple years old. Q5 is 69, here's 86. Q3 is 121. Q2 is 194, and a Q1 is 327. So you can see how that works. What I want to do now is just go to the, remember, from downloads here, you can download this Sidekick user manual, and I call this a crash course in depreciated cost. I've kind of distilled too many words down to just the few words that you need to understand to apply depreciated cost in a report you're working on. Then again, the trial version, you can download that. This, by the way, is recommended commentary for depreciated cost in general. I can see I spelled that wrong. Recommended commentary. I'll change that when we're done here. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to share the user manual. So here it is, Solomon's Sidekick. The illustration I like to use is right here at the top. This first column, let's say that's a $200,000 market value. Somebody paid $200,000 for a house. The agent and both agents, the seller, the buyer, even the county recorder agreed that the market value was $200,000. Now we as appraisers, we come along, and because we're real estate appraisers, there's always land involved. We understand that. We only appraise land and the improvements, right? So here's the land. Let's say that's, looks like about a third of, let's say that's 60,000 maybe. And here's the contributory value of the improvements, okay? So if this is 200 and this is, let's say that that's 60, then the market is paying $140,000 for the improvements. And a lot of people say, so what, you know? But it becomes valuable information, because if we do the cost approach, we can find out that the replacement cost is higher than the contributory value of that building. Here's the cost of the building, here's what the market's paying for it. And there's a ratio there. Let's say that in this case, the market's paying 70% or 75% of replacement cost. Well, that's really good to know, because now we can apply that 75% to that number we talked about first, which was the marginal cost of GLA, that $90 number. So in this case, the adjustment would be, would correspond to that. So I guess in this chart here, yeah, 30% is the depreciation. So the cost of the building is 30% more than what the market will pay for it, which means that here's the depreciation. There has to be 30% depreciation, okay? So that is the basis for this. And this is a little discussion about the difference between Sidekick and Solomon. Solomon does everything that Sidekick does. Solomon works on a web basis, so that you log in with your computer. You need internet to use it, and your calculations are not saved. The calculator will time out after like an hour. With Sidekick, it's an actual application that runs on your computer. You do need to have Excel installed to use Sidekick, but you do not need to be an Excel expert. All the formulas are done. It's kind of a workflow improvement, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes more in depth, but this is an example of how you can find a third bedroom, fourth bedroom railroad track adjustment for a given market value. And what we're doing with this calculator is applying a percentage to the market value to get these adjustments. And those adjustments are based on surveys that we've taken. I'll show you the surveys at this point. Let's see, here's the one for backing to a freeway. So in this case, we had 50 appraisers take the survey. The maximum dollar amount they felt applied to a $250,000 house was $25,000. The most frequent answer, the mode, was 12,500. The median was also 12.5, so that's an indication that we've got a normal curve, right? That means that, you know, 50 is by far, I mean, we're safe with that sample size. The mean, that's the average value, was 13,150. Now, what my preference is, based on what I've read, is that if we use the mean as a percentage of this 250,000 sale price, we've got this 5.26% to apply to another house, assuming that an adjustment as a percentage of sale price will get us closer to the answers that we need. And that's an example of secondary data, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So here, if you ever want to understand depreciated cost, here's everything you need to know. Here's the definition right out of the textbook, the age life method. It's called the economic age life method. It includes all forms of depreciation, whether it's physical, functional, or external. It's all included in that effective age estimate, which makes our job much easier, right? Here's an example. Average cost is not the basis for depreciated cost adjustments, and I'll show you why. Let's assume that we're going to do this comparison here, not with sale prices, but with cost. So 1,500 square feet of GLA with an average cost of 140 has a total cost of 210. 1,300 square feet, right out of the cost data, 147.70. So there's a $192,000 price tag on that 1,300 square foot house. Again, and that's replacement cost, current replacement cost. So there's a change of 200 square feet that is responsible, or that drives this $18,000 difference in cost. So you divide 18,000 by 200, and the adjustment per foot is $90. And that you saw earlier in that regression that I've done that's behind all the calculators. $90 per foot is the cost of one more foot for a Q4 house. So now the analysis comes when we apply depreciation. Remember at the top we had 30% depreciation. When you're estimating effective age and using the age-life method, there's a couple of variables that you need to have. One of them is economic life, and the cost data assumes 60 years for a Q4. You can change that in the calculator, but let's just stick with 60. So if effective age is 18 years and economic life is 60, there's 30% depreciation right here. 18 divided by 60, 30%. So when there's 30% depreciation, the market's paying 70% of cost, right? So 70% of 90, the market's paying $63. So that's how quickly we can get to a GLA adjustment from this pristine cost data with no confounding variables if we know what the depreciation is. And there's two ways to find the depreciation. With Solomon's Sidekick, we're estimating effective age, which I believe is legitimate, especially with the scope of work where we're not inspecting the interior. But there's other factors that come into play that we need to analyze. And that is that different parts of the house depreciate, different areas of the country have different costs. So for instance, if there's a marginal cost of $90 in the cost manual, and there's a multiplier of 1.03, like the base cost times this 1.03 times the 70% that the market's paying, now it's a $65 adjustment. And that multiplier comes from a table of zip codes plus other things that we add or subtract. So here's a discussion about masonry walls, for instance, would add 7% to a Q4 house. If the subject is in a subdivision, it could reduce the cost because of economies of scale. First, we'll zip down to, here's an example. We've retyped this out so it's easier to read. Arlington Heights, Illinois, 14%, okay? So this is all done for you automatically within Sidekick, but you can read about that on your own time. What I want to do now is stop sharing this screen and get to the actual calculator. This is the Sidekick trial version. It'll run until the end of this week for free. And then if you want to buy it, again, it's $50 after your use of a coupon called BESAFE, B-E-S-A-F-E. So here we've got the UAD quality. You can change that field to a 3. Okay, let's just go with a 4. Do you see how these numbers changed? Make that a 4. The multiplier, let's just leave that at 0, just so that you can see this working with base cost. If the economic life is 60, and you can change that to 65 if you like. Okay, but we're going to keep it at 60. So if effective age is 0, that means remaining economic life is 60. There's 0 depreciation, and the market's paying 100%. So here's that $90 again, that 100% of the base cost for a Q4 house. Now, if I change this to effective age of 30 years, now we've got 50% depreciation right here, 50%. And you can see our little chart up here. This doesn't scale up real well, but this is supposed to be 50-50 here. But anyway, here's $45, right? It's half of 90, so $45. This column assumes that depreciation occurs equally throughout the house, which is not the real world from my experience, and I'm sure from yours. So we've got a way to handle that. Let's make this effective age of 18. So now we're going to have 30% depreciation. There's that $63 that we had before, right? And if we have a multiplier of 3, Now it's 65. So the reason I use 3, this is my zip code, and you can find yours in the book. But most typically, I'm doing a subdivision, a subdivision type of assignment where my zip code multiplier happens to be plus 12. The multiple builds savings, the economies of scale is minus 9. So this is the number that I've just kind of got sitting here in the calculator. Whenever I'm doing a subdivision house, I'm using this 3. And if it's brick, I'll add 5 or 6% to that and make it 9 or 10. We don't have a lot of brick up here in Minnesota. So there we are, multipliers 3. So there's my adjustment. If there's 18 years effective age, if it's 20 years effective age, it changes a little bit, right? It got smaller because there's more depreciation. Now there's 33%. So let's make that back to 18. Now this field up here has nothing to do with the calculators. This is just a convenience. Like if you're appraising a 1,200 square foot house, it will show you the search criteria that you would use if you're looking at plus or minus 20% of the GLA. So that's unrelated to these numbers down here. It's just a convenience. We're not using different numbers based on different size houses. Okay. So now we need to talk about this middle column. If I had 100 here, that means 100%. That means that the gross living area is depreciating at the same rate as the house as a whole, and that might be true in your market. In the basement, I think it's different in my market. So for instance, basement size, that does not depreciate in my market. That's a $13 adjustment per foot for the basement size. Basement finish, full bath, and basement half bath, they do depreciate faster, and I think it's an a functional depreciation matter. A basement bathroom or basement living space, it might cost a certain amount of money, but the market doesn't pay full cost after the house is used because there's just less function to a basement. And you can change that however you want. Maybe in your market, that adjustment should be $14, or maybe it should be 12 or even 10. But this is a place for you to interpret your market, to let the grid inform your adjustments. I mean, you know a good adjustment when you see it, and it's probably related to this percent of economic life. Now, the way I like to explain percent of economic life is I'll use this deck as an example. Here's the deck. A 100 square foot deck is a depreciated cost of $2,300, but the deck only has a 20-year lifespan. Okay, so 20 is 33% of that 60-year life. So now I've got a smaller deck adjustment, $761 for a 100 square foot deck. If it's 200 feet, make it $1,500, right? But this is just a quick way for you to apply some of your thinking and your knowledge about how things depreciate or what they're worth compared to cost, regardless of the age of the house. So my thinking here on the deck is I know that that's 33% based on the National Association of Home Builders. My reasoning is that a covered porch has less exposure to the elements than the deck, but it still has more than the GLA, so I make that 50. The screen porch, it's even got more protection. A lot of times those have got walls halfway up, for instance. So 67%, and then for an enclosed porch, I just use 75 as a rule of thumb in my market. It seems to work. So here's a $4,900 per 100 square feet of enclosed porch, but it's worth less because it's got a lower lifespan, right? Now this one up here, the gross living area, we've had a lot of appraisers use the calculators and they like all of the adjustments except this one. They thought that was too high. And of course, we're all pretty sensitive to GLA adjustments. We can see in the grid when we're over adjusting or when we're under adjusting. So we thought about this. Gross living area has many components that have a short economic life. For instance, carpet and paint is 10 years, appliances might be 20, windows might be 20, the roof is 20. So we took a survey, and I've been telling people for a long time that the answer was 62. I looked up the survey, which was from like 3 years ago, and it was actually 62.6, I believe. So if you want to use 63, it doesn't make much difference, 41 versus 40, but use it something in the low 60s, or again, based on your market, find a number that works for you, because like when you use 65 in the grid, you might be able to see that a lower number would narrow the range more. Maybe it's 40, maybe it's someplace in between. So this is a place where you can apply your experience to and to what you're seeing in the grid. And the rationalization again is that gross living area has a shorter lifespan than the 60-year economic life assumption. If you want to just use these numbers right here, these are all assuming equal depreciation. These allow you to calibrate that. We call that calibration. Okay. Now we have another application within Sidekick. This is the survey application. I'm going to expand that up a little bit. Here, if we type in a value of a house, this is the comp. Let's say that that's comp 1. It instantly applies those percentage depreciation figures from our surveys to the most popular, at least in my market, these are the ones I use most often. Okay, so a 3rd bedroom, $4,800 is 1.92% of 250,000. So that's based on that 1.92%, which is the mean divided by, I guess it was, we did use 250 in that survey as the example. A 4th bedroom adds less, or if it's superior to the subject, it deducts less. Okay, fronting a busy road, and the example is there's a photo in the user manual that shows the road I was talking about. It's one of these county roads that got more and more busy. Pretty soon they were building houses on both sides, and it's a wide road that's got parking along the curb. It's a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, but it's not a quiet little cul-de-sac. It's got traffic. Okay, it's hard to park. So that was I think it was 5.7%. Here's how to figure out what the percentages are. Just type in 100,000. So yeah, 5.7%, 1.9%, 0.77%. So here's where you can see what those percentages are if you're understanding this calculator. So we're back to this $250,000 house. Backing to the freeway is less of an issue according to the survey. And here I think it's a good time to talk about what this is. This is secondary data. Secondary data. In the Appraisal of Real Estate 14th edition, and probably in the preceding volumes, they talk about secondary data as any data that does not apply or does not come directly from the neighborhood on that specific assignment, that comp pool. It's data that is collected by a data research company. So I guess we're a data research company. It could be assessor data, but it's used to back up other methods. So for instance, if I had my comps in the grid and one of them was on a busy road, I could use pairs within the adjusted values before I made the busy road adjustment and just see what the grid's telling me as far as what that busy road should be. And let's say it's in the $15,000 range. I use the peer consensus survey, and what do you know? There's secondary data to back up that pairing of adjusted sales. To do paired sales, we really should have houses that are equal in every way except for the busy road. Second best is to make adjustments for the differences and then do the pairing, and this will help give you support for that process. Okay, so the water tower in the backyard, power lines, railroad tracks. This is an in-ground pool in cold winter. And again, there's surveys. You can read the surveys in the user manual. The mild winter, it's an $11,000 value for a $250,000 house. The pole building, this is independent. These two are independent of this number. So let's say we put 500,000 up here. We've still got 4260 and 14120. And you can look at the survey. We did not tie this to an average property value. We just asked, what does a pole building of this size add in your experience? And that's where those numbers are coming from. So read the survey if you think it's legit, if it applies, if it works in the grid. Again, secondary data, it's just a help. It's not the primary way that you would arrive at an opinion of value, but it does back up other things that you're doing at secondary, okay? And by the way, these numbers have worked pretty well for me, and that could be due to confirmation bias. I want them to work, right? But and when they don't, I ignore it. And when they do, I think, yeah, this is perfect. This is wonderful. But they do seem to work. And try it yourself. You've got a few days here. Take an old report and go through and use these adjustments and see if you are on the same page. Okay. So here's our condition adjustment. In the survey, we said to assume a Q4 house. And what would be the difference between a C3 and a C4? Well, it turns out it's $22,000 on a $250,000 house. If we go back to that $100,000 again, whoops. It's 8.9%. I was talking to an appraiser, and he said that his mentor or somebody that's got a lot of respect in his area says that it's 9%. So that was pretty amazing that a group of appraisers came up with the answer as this individual expert. And if you want to see why that works that way, there's a video, a link to a video here, 5 minutes, and it explains a principle called wisdom of crowds. This was a discovery made back in 1906 by a knighted Sir Francis Galton in Elizabethan England. What Galton was trying to do was prove that the common people could not run the society. The nobility needed to be in charge. And what he found in this, he's a scientist, what he found is, well, you know, the average of many opinions is better than one expert opinion always. I don't know, that's pretty strong statement. I guess it depends on the question. But watch that video and use these adjustments that are based on Galton's discovery and just see for yourself, right? We're analysts, we look at data, our job is to reconcile data and to be able to show how we use the data. So there's Galton, there's the adjustments. Here's a condition or a quality adjustment for a C3. So here we asked, assume you have a C3 house, it's good condition. What's the adjustment for quality between a Q4 and a Q3? $7,100, 7.1%. Okay, and that's on that $100,000 house. I don't think there's any Q1s that are for $100,000, but if there were, it would be a 10% adjustment to go from a Q1 to a Q2. And again, this is based on survey. It's not based on cost data, just a survey. I know there's appraisers that use Solomon, that use our cost numbers to do condition or quality adjustments. I don't do that. I just use the survey results. So that is, you know, the first one here, depreciated cost. That's a primary data technique. The survey results are a secondary data technique. So if I'm working a grid, I will apply these adjustments first, and I will also do an adjustment for concessions. In my market, I've never seen a cash sale that had concessions, which is one piece of evidence. And whenever I see houses in negotiation, sometimes they'll add concessions in exchange for a higher sale price, right? So in my market, I just subtract the seller concessions. So I would do that. Then I would do the depreciated cost adjustments. Then I would look at comparing adjusted houses in the grid and use these if any of these applied. And And then I think I've got pretty good support for my adjustments in the grid. Here's a time adjustment. The annual rate of change is 2%. Here's comp 1, sale price of $250,000, concessions of $250,000. That means the market value is $247,500. Again, I'm adjusting out the concessions. Let's say that this one came under contract on March 24th, 2019, and the effective date was 4/8. Watch what happens when I change that to 4. What's today? The 15th. Okay, so now we have 388 days. So the adjustment is that value times the number of days divided by 365 times the rate divided by 100. If I change the rate to 4, that adjustment should double. And if we go back to 2, it goes back. Now you can enter the comp by the street name or the address, whatever, just the number, the price, the concessions. And this is just a way for you to document time adjustments. It's not the answer, it's support. In my market, if I'm appraising a house in the spring, there's pretty good appreciation in the springtime, at least traditionally in my market. We're coming out of the cold winter. If I'm appraising a house in January, I might not apply a time adjustment to a comp that sold in last June's market, because last June's market was probably higher actually. On an annual basis, it might have been 2%, but on a month-to-month basis, it might have actually been down. So I just don't do adjustments for those months that I know would be seasonally higher than the subject time period. This is the effective age calculator. And here you need to have separate cost data to figure out the replacement cost. Here's the site value. And in any of our calculators, anything that's in white is something that you can edit, okay? So 350,000, that could be 340. And all this does is show you the trade-offs. If the replacement cost is 340, the site value is 60, site improvements are 12, and the market value is 360. Depreciation has to be 52,000. 52,000 divided by 340 is 15%, right? So that means the market's paying 85%. If economic life is 60, effective age has to be 9, and remaining economic life has to be 51. You can change this to 65, and you'll get a little bit different result, right? So use this maybe as a teaching tool if you have an underwriter that's wondering what's going on, or if you're using other cost data, here's a way to get a better estimate of effective age. It just pretty much shows trade-offs more than anything. This tab is called Report, and what that does is it duplicates this page. So this adjustment of 62 right here, or excuse me, of $40, if we go to data or go to report, there's this $40 adjustment. This is in black and white. It's made to print 8.5 by 11. That's why the size is like this. Oops. And there's a little bit of explanation of what's going on. Talks about all the costs are marginal costs extracted from published average cost data, and marginal cost is the cost of one more. So a little bit more information that you can refer to. It talks about this EQD column, assumes all cost categories depreciate equally. Some depreciate at different rates due to different lifespans, okay? So that is about it for the Sidekick trial version. Again, it does maybe half or more of what the actual subscription does. It's quicker in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to applying survey results. The time adjustment mechanism is slower, I'll have to admit that. The effective age might something that you might never use, but I think of it as a quick way if you're doing limited scope assignments like a desktop, or an exterior, which is pretty relevant in today's market. So Kyle, do we have any questions before I switch over to the Solomon website?
Yeah, we've got three here.
Okay.
First one is, where can we get the National Home Builders value percentages with regards to percent economic life?
Okay. I'm going to answer that question by stopping to share this screen. Again, we're back to solomonappraisal.com. If you go here under downloads, under links, I'm sorry. And you have to be careful with this link. It'll take you right off the website. Here's how to get to the last week's webinar if you want to watch that. Here's the lifespan of components. And I've included those actually in, to some extent in the cost manual, but this is a publication by the National Association of Home Builders, and they'll show you what the life expectancy is for, like, for instance, for a deck. It'll talk about countertops. It'll talk about linoleum, roofs. There's a whole bunch of information there. That's a little bit of an old, it's like from 2005, I believe, but it was published by the National Association of Home Builders together with a lender, and I think it was Bank of America. They've also got another more recent download that you can look at, the cost of construction survey. That doesn't break it out into the same categories that we use in the grid, but it's kind of helpful to see what percentage of a construction project is profit, for instance, or what percentage of it is site preparation, what percentage of it is, it breaks out differently, but it's interesting reading if you're an appraiser that's wanting to understand new construction. So that's where you would look at that. What I'm going to do now is, do we have another question on Sidekick?
Yeah, we have two more.
Okay.
Do you have verbiage explaining survey results usage?
But let me see. Other adjustments are developed from survey data as a percentage of sale price. So right there, that's all I say, and I've never been questioned on it. If I did get a question and they said, where did you get your bedroom count adjustment? I said, well, it's based on a survey that showed that a third bedroom is worth 1.92%. And I wouldn't tell them everything at once. If they said, I need to see the survey, then you've got, you can show them the survey. Again, we just have to show them where we're getting our data and be using it impartially. So next question.
How do I determine my multiplier using the zip code?
Okay. I'm going to go back and share. Well, here's an example, 35901. Gadsden, Alabama, 35901, minus 9%. So there's minus 9%. The subject is a Q3 brick house, 20 miles from a metro area in zip code 35901. So minus 9 for Gadsden, Alabama, plus 8 for brick. Here's exterior masonry walls, plus 8. Minus 4 because it's 20 miles outside of a metro. And this is just, here's the guidance. We don't get a lot of guidance in the cost table. It just says that areas outside a metro, work outside metro areas may cost 2 to 6% less. So use your judgment. I just used 4, okay? And that's related to labor rates. So minus 9 plus 8 minus 4 equals minus 5. That would be an example for this Q3 brick house. So we're using a zip code, we're using outside the metro, and we're using brick. Here's one for my example, a Q4. This is where this is my world, a Q4 subject, and 55123. If we scroll down, we would find 12% for zip code 551. It's got to be here in Minnesota somewhere. So 551 is 12%. And then I'm saying minus 9 for the economies of scale of being in a subdivision. And you can see it's kind of loosey-goosey here. This is just a guide. It's expecting us to be able to make judgments on our own. But I just use 12 minus 9 for the subdivision, so that's why I'm typically using 3. Okay, another question?
That's it.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing this and see if I can share the main website. So this again is Solomon. This is what you'll see when you go do a search for solomonappraisal.com. And now what I want to do for the remaining time, we've got like 15 minutes. I just want to go through an example of like the most common question we get on using Solomon in its original form on the web application. So I'm going to log in. I can do it with my last name and an email address here, but I'm going to use my username and password. There's a little bit of a trail you need to follow. You can see the survey results there, but I'm going to go to the adjustment calculators. First, I'm going to show you that this is the Solomon adjustment version of Sidekick, right? So here's a zip code. I'm going to type in the word base, meaning no multiplier for the zip code, 4, and remaining life of 60 years. Just to show you that there it is, it's the same $90 that we've been talking about all along. Both applications use the same data. There's no calibration feature here, but it does look up the zip code for you automatically. And if you want to add, or let's say in this case, subtract 9% for being in that, this factor field here is how to add a percentage to the multiplier. That's all that is. It's been kind of confusing, but if it's in a subdivision, it's going to be less expensive to build multiple builds, and I think that's minus 9. Here's plus 12, here's minus 9. The net gives you this $82. So if there's a remaining life of 30, so a house that's half depreciated, it's 41. So it's just arithmetic. Now we'll get to Solomon cost. The reason to use Solomon cost, and this is the one that most people use, it's for when you measure a house and you think it's more credible to estimate a market value than it is to estimate a percentage of depreciation. And I think that's how it really is. You could use this with appraisals that you've already done to try out Solomon. But let's just say that I've got an assignment for a refi. And this house sold last year for $250,000. Got the MLS right in front of me. I love these assignments, right? The people are doing a refi because they want to lower their rate. The rate's dropped. And let's say the site value is 10. Whoop, is 40. And the site improvements are 10. And it's in, again, 5, 5, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to give it a minus 9 because it's in a subdivision. Okay, there's that minus 9, which is taking this zip code multiplier down from 12 down to 3. Let's say it's a quality rating of 4. And it's got 1,200 square feet of GLA. Has central air. It's got a 1,200-foot basement. And this is how Minnesotans build their houses, okay? They have to dig a hole that's like 9 feet deep to get the footings down. They'd only have to go down 4 feet to do a slab, to get the footings down for a slab. But as long as you're there digging, you might as well dig a basement, right? So that's why we've got all these basements. And full bath, let's say there's one basement bathroom. There's no need to enter upstairs or GLA bathrooms. That's included in the cost data. Let's say that there's a fireplace and there's a 440 square foot garage. We click calculate. So now what's happened is, I think this is the fastest cost approach in the business. We've applied these measurements to get cost. Here's this 167,247 cost. The basement is 60,000. Additional features, that's that single fireplace. The additional features is the total of fireplace, deck, porch, and so on. Here's the garage cost. These are the per foot costs that you can use in your 1004 on page 3, okay? And because we have a 250,000 market value and the site value is 40 and the site improvements are 10, we know that we have to have depreciated costs of improvements of 200, right? 250 minus 40 minus 10, the market's paying $200,000 for the improvements. They cost $253,000. So there's $53,000 of depreciation. And I know this is a little bit out of order, but it follows the 1004 format, okay? So all of these line right up with what you'd see in the 1004. The 1004 cost approach gets to a market value by estimating depreciation. We're getting to depreciation by estimating a market value. And I don't think of that as appraising to a number. I think of that as a hypothesis that we're testing using the scientific method, okay? So economic life is 60. That is chosen when we chose this quality rating of 4. It's 60 years. That's assumed in the cost data. So to me, it kind of makes sense to use the same assumptions. Effective age has to be 13 years, right? And it has to be 13 years because depreciation is 22%. And depreciation has to be 22% because 53 divided by 253 is 22%. And because there's a total of 60 years, remaining economic life has to be 47. Okay, so now we get down to equal depreciation throughout the property. And I'm going to calibrate, use 63 now. For the basement finish, I'm going to say 50, 50, 50, 50 for the fireplace because now I've got a second fireplace worth less than the first one. There's my 33 based on 20 years. And this is just the way I do it. You can do it differently. So just like that, I've got adjustments that I can bring to the grid. Now, when I use these adjustments in the grid, I might find out that, wait a minute, the market is saying with those adjustments that it's really a $260,000 house. There's been some appreciation over the last year. So now I've tested the hypothesis that it was 250 still, and I was shown wrong by the data. And now I've got a different set of adjustments, a little bit different, but they line up with this 260. So I go through that iteration process to make sure I've got adjustments that work in the grid and get to this market value that I think is there based on the comps, okay? So everything's hunky-dory, everything's well and good. But now let's say this house is only 5 years old. We've got and this is a big question that a lot of people have. We've got this built-in contradiction. We're saying that the effective age is 10, and we're saying the house is a C3. That doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because the cost data is not as accurate as we would like it to be in theory, right? Cost data is a survey result of builders. It is not what builders use to price a house. There's a lot of factors that go into what they can charge for a new construction property. All these numbers are based on surveys. And as we've seen, surveys have bell curves, right? So these numbers assume that we're right in the middle of that bell curve, that normal curve. But you might have one that's down this way or down that way, right? So remember this depreciated cost of adjustments now, or depreciated cost is 210 because we went up to 260, right? There's a little bit less depreciation, but the house only has an effective age of, it has 10 years, but it's really only 5 years old. Go down to the factor field. Remember these numbers, first of all, and let's say minus 15. Okay, that brings effective age down to 7. Let's go minus 18. So now, effective age lines up with the age of the house, which is normal for a C3 in average condition that's 5 years old, right? So we're not a slave to the data, we're reconciling data. If you have good reason to believe effective age should be 5, well, the difference is in this factor right here. And notice that the adjustments didn't change. The reason the adjustments didn't change is because the depreciated cost did not change. This depreciated cost is the same no matter how much it costs to build it. And what you just showed is that in this particular case, that cost data should be a little bit different than the publisher said it would based on that survey. And again, the survey is a normal distribution. It's a bell curve. So don't get locked into that center of the curve. I mean, the cost might be either side of that middle, and you can change the cost in this application when you have a reason to do so, like knowing the effective age should be 5, and then this factor has to go make the cost lower to make everything fit based on everything you know, not just on using one source of data and getting tunnel vision and contradicting yourself by having an effective age higher than actual age on a C3. So that's the biggest question that we've had on Solomon. Questions on Solomon, please.
Yeah, we got 3 questions on Solomon. How do you, in a 2-story versus 1-story situation, how does that make a difference?
Right, that's a really good question. I grew up with cost data. I used Marshall and Swift for just a few years. The one I really liked was RS Means. They had 3 different costs for a 1-story, a 2-story, and a 1.5-story. I loved it. It made sense to me. And then when I started doing this type of work, the data that I could license from National Building Cost has a different system. They use, that's a complexity issue when you're talking about 1-story versus 2-story versus 3-story. What they do is they count the corners in the house. Like a 4-corner house costs less than a 6-corner house, okay? And I'm going to see if I can, and again, this is good reading. This will explain what's going on. But here's that, we had that prior question on the age of the different pieces. That's all in the cost, or in the manual. I'm going to see if I can find that quickly without wasting time here. But toward the end, here we go. 4-corner house, 6-corner house, 8-corner house. They don't talk about stories, they talk about corners. That's just the way they do it. And I just want to use their data consistently with what's published, so we don't distinguish between 1-story and 2-story as being different cost. If you think there's a difference, you can use the factor field, for instance. If you think a 2-story costs 5% less than a 1-story, use -5 in the factor field, and just so that you understand why you're doing it. But here is the quality ratings from National Building Cost are 1, 1 and 2, 2, 2 and 3, and so on. You see best standard, good standard, I believe is the Q4. But we've got these intermediate steps. So we've got a total of 11, but we make assumptions that 4 corners is for a Q4, 6 corners is for a Q3, 8 corners is for a Q2, and 10 corners is for a Q1. And I'm just trying to hit it in the middle of the fairway here. This is a streamlined cost approach, but that's my thinking on how we're handling the 1-story versus 2-story. Okay, any other question, or you have another question on Solomon?
Yep. How are you determining site improvements? Is there a rule of thumb?
Well, we have a survey. As is value of site improvements. A lot of appraisers in my territory from doing appraisers for 20 years and doing some reviews along the way. Everything's $5,000, right? So we did a survey and we said, assume a typical $250,000 house with city sewer and city water. What would you expect to see as market reaction to the site improvements? So we had 92 people in the survey, very good turnout. It was a simple question. I think this is pretty good data. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got 5 if we have time to cover them.
Sure, I'll stay here as long as there's people asking questions.
With regards to the surveys, is there one related to stories?
No, I do not have a 1-story versus 2-story survey. Sorry.
All right. And then how do you work with detached garages, shops? Do you estimate them as is improvements? Is there a place to cost out detached improvements?
Okay. The interesting thing that I learned along the way is that any building on the site, apart from a garage, let's say you've got the house and the garage, attached or detached garage. The shop is actually a site improvement. The stable is a site improvement. The sport court, the tennis court, the swimming pool, all of those things can be considered site improvements. And that's really good news because now we can just look at what they add to value, not what they cost and how much the depreciation is that might apply. So we've got that good survey for the outbuilding. Survey results. Here's the accessory building. We showed appraisers the photo of the pole barn with the gravel floor, and we asked, what's the contributory value of an average condition 40 by 60 pole building with a gravel floor, no electricity? The most frequent, the mode was $10,000, the median was 10, and the average was 10. So I think I showed this to somebody who's kind of a dignitary in the appraisal business, and he said, well, yeah, that's because everybody thinks a pole building is worth $10,000. Nobody really knows. But at least here's survey results, 46 responses, and it came out to $4.17 or $4.26 per square foot. And that's a site improvement. It's not something that you need to cost out and then depreciate. The steel building with the concrete floor area and the power and so on, insulation windows and a service door, those are much more valuable, $14 per foot.
Okay. Next question on the calculator. What if the effective age is 20?
If the effective age is 20, so back to this one. If effective age is 20, well, the first thing, how do you know effective age is 20? Because it's a 20-year-old house? What I would do is I would go up here and type in the word base, because now, in a sense, we're extracting a multiplier from the market. We know that this is 20, so this has got to be higher cost, right? So let's try 10. Let's try 15. Let's try 20. I'm kind of curious how somebody would know that it was 20, because it's routine to have like a 20-year-old house with an effective age lower than that. But again, whenever you play around with this factor field, just keep in mind that it does not affect the adjustments, because anytime you add to cost, you're adding to depreciation at a given depreciated cost. So feel free to use the factor field. It'll make this look good, and it won't affect these, because again, any increase in cost also increases depreciation, and it washes out. It gets back to zero effect.
So follow up on that. They say they live in an area with 100-year plus houses.
Okay. I can probably talk them over the phone, but I run into that too. I mean, we've got houses that are 100 years old, and my boss used to tell me that, well, economic life has to be 100 years then, right? Because the houses are 100 years old. Well, that's not really true. The replacement of that house has got a 60-year lifespan, if you're using this cost data, or close to 60 years. Whenever we add or change the roof, we add life to the house, right? So the remaining economic life depends on the maintenance, no matter how old it is. I mean, we've got plenty of houses that are 100 years old that have got 30 years of life remaining because they've got a new roof, new windows, new furnace. You know, they've been maintained. But again, that might be a reason for a phone call, or send me an email, scullen2@comcast.net. You can find that email all over on the website, and then we can go share a screen and work through a problem.
And then the last question on calculator: can the cost numbers be exported into the report cost approach?
No, at this point, no. We've talked to a couple of a couple of forms companies that we're thinking of integrating this with, but at this point, no, it's just something that you do manually.
And then just a question on how a Sidekick purchase works. Is that a one time a year, or does it get updated? Do you have to buy a new version?
Okay, that's a really good question. Solomon, this one here, we update the data, and if you're on the monthly recurring thing, you'll just see that we'll send out a letter and say, hey, the new data is in, okay? And it doesn't change your expense. If you bought it in July for 1 year, the data will update in December, and you'll be good to go. Now on Sidekick, it's a different operation. The calculator stops working on January 1st. So if you buy it at the beginning of the year, you're paying $100 for all 365 days. And that's why we have these coupons. Right now it's on a special, because of the webinar, but it's 50% off, but there's really only a percentage of the lifespan left in it. It does end, and then you rebuy it again if you want it in December. Like last year, I think we had a promotion. It was the Cyber Monday sale where we had a pretty big percentage off. So that's when a lot of people bought it I guess, when is Cyber Monday? Is that November? We had the data ready, so we went with it. So probably in November or so, we'll have the new data. The old calculator will still work, but then on January 1st, it'll just lock up on you, and then you'll need to buy it again. So, and I have an obligation to the people that we license the data from. They want to be paid a percentage on our sales, and we're happy to do that. It's excellent data, but they don't want us to be having data floating around out there that's bought once and used for 10 years. So that's why we do that.
And that's all the questions.
Okay. And if anybody's still watching and they want to buy, just go to solomonappraisal.com, and there'll be plenty of places where you can click on a green button that says order now, and then you can choose, it's called a plan, I guess, or a subscription, but Sidekick, if you click on Sidekick, it'll give you a place to enter that code, which is be safe, and then you'll get $50 off, and it'll be good until January 1st. All right. Well, thank you all for being with us today. We'll do this again next week. I'll send out an announcement, and I'm going to try to make, change it up a little bit, still keeping with the theme of how to use depreciated cost, even if you're only doing an exterior inspection. So on Solomon, you would be using this calculator, and you would be typing in your zip code and your remaining economic life. If I was doing a 40-year-old house that was average, I would use 30, and I'd use those adjustments, and that would be my support, and it would have taken me a minute to find adjustments. And then if I needed a busy road adjustment, I'd go down here. Let's see here, where was this? Adverse location. There's the busy road right there, okay? 50 people, 5.7%. All right. Thank you.